Hey everybody, my name is Andrew Gulyas. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, and this is my Gutsy story. In March of 2020, I was going through quite a stressful time again in my life. I think like a lot of people were. It was just the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was dealing with both, I think moments where I was feeling like I had lost my freedom, and then in my personal life, I was also dealing with the loss of, a very significant partner in my life, and not a death or anything, but just a relationship that was no longer kind of around. So all of this to say that it was just another very, very uncertain time in my life, and that sense of stress and anxiety contributed to me ending up in the hospital, unfortunately, on March 13th of 2020. And so prior to that, I had gone to a walk-in clinic a couple of times and been really diagnosed with what they believed were hemorrhoids at the time, which we later found out was actually a perianal abscess that required emergency surgery. And that's exactly where I took myself on March 13th of 2020. And so I went through the emergency surgery, had the abscess drained, discovered that I now had a fistula, which was the first time I'd ever heard the term before in my entire life. And being in the middle of a pandemic, unfortunately, I didn't get a whole lot of follow-up after my surgery in the emergency room in March. And so luckily, I was able to get a lot of information online from the Crohn's Colitis Canada website, from a lot of other, internet-based sites as well. I think I kind of started to believe that I was dealing with what was Crohn's and maybe ulcerative colitis. And so over the spring and summer of 2020, not necessarily being able to do a whole lot, but having the privilege of working from home, I was able to get better and it was great. And then all of a sudden in July 2020, I don't know what happened. It was like a switch flipped. And from July 1st to, I believe it was August 14th, I lost about 30 pounds. I was visibly ill in terms of how much weight I had lost, in terms of just my general demeanor, and my, how much energy I had. And I think people at work, even on Zoom calls, were able to tell that, something was clearly not wrong, but obviously changing, and they were concerned. So it was eventually at the advice of a close cousin of mine who is also a nurse, who, after hearing my symptoms that I was dealing with for about 6 weeks since the start of July, she said, "You need to take yourself to the emergency room again." And so I did that, had a bunch of tests done to me. They told me to come back for a colonoscopy a couple days later. I did that. And as I was coming out of my colonoscopy, I was notified that I would be getting checked into the intensive care, not unit, but the intensive care floor for basically intravenous steroids, antibiotics, and treatment, more or less, because it had gotten so bad. And that was finally when I was actually diagnosed. I think it was August 17th or the 16th of 2020, after the colonoscopy, where it was finally determined that I had ulcerative colitis and a severe case of Crohn's disease. So I think for me, it was, obviously not only a battle of educating myself, but I think it was also a battle to get others to educate me on what it was that they thought I was dealing with, and that what they suspected that I might be dealing with. And, it wasn't easy with the pandemic. And I don't think that obviously helped my case necessarily a whole lot, but at the same time, that initial period in March where I didn't know what I was dealing with, where I thought I was relatively healthy for the spring and summer, and then to get really severely ill again in such a short period of time, was just a real reality check for me, I think, and really gave new meaning to the slogan, or whatever you want to call it, the cliche that health is really wealth. So that is my long-winded story. I think part of how I really started dealing with my diagnosis, and the symptoms too, that just haven't seemed to really fully go away since I've been diagnosed, which is unfortunate, obviously, but I think it's reality for almost everybody that goes through this kind of disease and suffers from these type of issues, which is incredibly unfortunate because so many people must be suffering in silence that we just don't know about. And so for me, that's also been a coping mechanism, I think. And not to, not speak up when I'm feeling like I need help and stuff like that, but just because um, I feel like there's almost a predictable cycle to how I'm going to feel physically and mentally with, my life and this disease and this identity. And so I can kind of track how my physical symptoms will last a certain number of days, how that will then in turn affect how my mental health feels for a certain number of days after that. And then kind of once I've gone through the motions of all of the associated pains and anxieties and uncertainties, I then kind of get a bit of peace of mind for a little bit. And that's great. And so that's kind of what I really look forward to. And I think more and more now I'm focusing less on the days where I'm dealing with the physical and mental symptoms of the disease and more on those days where I'm feeling great. And, my relationship with food is great. And I can eat the things that, you know, not everything necessarily that I love, but the things that still do make me happy and bring me a bit of joy and that I can tolerate at least. And so I think one of the other big adjustments for me with the symptoms and just kind of, being locked up more or less in the midst of the pandemic with this disease is the fact that I've now had to learn how to give myself shots. So like my Humira shots being an EpiPen type delivery mechanism is super easy for me. It's intimidating, I think, because needles just are for a lot of people. But I think that's been a huge adjustment for me having to just give myself a needle, and it's increased, unfortunately, from biweekly doses to weekly doses rather recently. But at the same time, I understand that it's necessary. I don't necessarily like how I feel after taking a shot and knowing every Thursday is going to be the day where I feel like I'm essentially sick or something like that. But understanding that it's all in the name of achieving remission at some point and that is possible, and knowing that people do it and they enjoy it for years at a time sometimes, that's kind of what I'm looking forward to now. And so I think when when I got in touch with the Crohn's and colitis with Crohn's Colitis Canada, I wasn't necessarily thinking that this would go as positively as I would want, and because I was dealing with some things at that moment in time. But it's crazy how quickly things can change with this disease, not only with what you're feeling, but just, your mental disposition towards it and how much resilience you feel like you've got on any given day. So yeah, I think that's probably been the ways where I've felt like I've needed to adjust most, and also, dealing with the fact that I'm going to feel sick for some time is just going to be reality, and that's okay. And I'm okay with that. Knowing that my situation really isn't that unique, I think, and not that that's necessarily so positive sounding, but it is because there's strength in numbers, I think. And, being someone that wears their heart on their sleeve in a lot of ways, I reach out for that kind of help to people who I think will understand me. And, not necessarily just for the empathy or sympathy, but just because there are people that understand genuinely how I'm feeling when I'm describing what it is that I'm going through. And so um, I think just knowing that there's tons of people out there that have been through what I've gone through and beyond, and much worse. And not to sound like I'm celebrating that, but just knowing that you can go through so much and still be the person that you think you should be and that you've always felt like, maybe in some ways. It's an empowering thing, but I think it's also something that you really have to teach yourself to believe. I don't even know if I truly believe it yet, but I feel like, by preaching it, I'm practicing it in a lot of ways. And I'm hoping that by other people hearing this as well, that kind of makes sense and hopefully resonates, because I found myself on many online communities, whether it be Reddit, whether it be, the Crohn's Colitis Canada Instagram, whether it be the webinars that happen. There's just plenty of places where you can go to feel validated about, what you're experiencing, and just knowing that you can get that support, whether it might not be from your family, your friends, your doctors, your healthcare team, or whoever it might be. So Yeah. And, I think I've got a bit of an insight into this because I spent a little bit of time in the nonprofit industry. And so I think I understand how important, you know, gifts in kind are, donations are, and things like that. There's no substitute for that, especially I think when, what we're looking for is a science-based answer to a very, very complex science-based question. So, by showing people that this disease has a face in a name, I think in some ways, and this is what um, I think my mom told me actually when I mentioned the fact that I was going to do a 10K run for my Gutsy walk. And so I had set a fairly modest fundraising goal, I think of about $500. And by like 3 hours from posting on social media that I was doing this, I had hit my goal and then surpassed it some. And I think what she had said there by, sometimes people just need to put a face and a name to a cause or an issue. That will be enough, to help them kind of want to help the change that you're trying to make. And so I think as much as I could run 10K as fast as I possibly can on any day or beyond that, and whether we're doing it all together in a group or whether I'm going to be doing it by myself on June 6th, I think it's just a small symbolic gesture of kind of appreciation and gratitude to the people who are not stopping, at any cost essentially at this point to help, the millions of people that suffer from this awful disease in so many different ways. And, the people that are dealing with it that don't even know they're dealing with it yet. So I think that, not to put it in such crude terms, but, I think cash is king in finding answers to really complex problems sometimes. And, I want to contribute to that however I possibly can. So for me, this is the first time I've really like been able to have a voice. And I don't even, I think fully understand how far this will reach eventually. I just think that given the opportunity, if you can make meaningful change, you should try. And so for me, and just seeing how much the world has evolved in the last 12 months, even, I think, this was just some way that I could hopefully get involved and use a platform to get out to people that look, maybe like me, but maybe not like me at all. And, to kind of show that this disease can affect anybody at any point in their life in a lot of respects, and that there's, strength in, I think, speaking out, but also strength in speaking up. And then that's where that support system really comes in, because I don't think I would even be talking to you right now in some ways if I hadn't spoken up on social media and I hadn't shown, I guess, a side of vulnerability in a lot of ways to a lot of people that I had never really shown that to before. And it just really reaffirmed to me how massive that support system really is. I thought it was just a handful of people in a lot of ways, being my close family, a couple close friends and stuff like that. But in reality, I mean, the people who made the first donations were some people who I haven't talked to in years necessarily, or even connected with in a very long time. And, not to get like so emotional about it, but it was crazy to see. And it was so touching. And I was so taken back. And I think it just goes to show that, whenever maybe you're feeling like you don't have anybody in your corner, when you do have that platform to speak up, whether it be social media, whether it be an interview, whether it be just anything, kind of any opportunity, whatever you want to call it, it's important to take it. And I think that's what I've tried to do here. Walk with me on Sunday, June 6th. Together as one, we walk to stop Crohn's and colitis.